What happened to Montenegro? Strange question, right? But what most people don't realize is that Montenegro once had a reputation of being a fiercely independent and unconquerable land. Back in the day, when much of Southeastern Europe fell under Ottoman rule, Montenegro was, for a long time, the exception and was often a thorn in the Ottoman backside. Its people were poor, rugged, but defiant, bound by clan, faith, and honor. These mountainous people were governed by a belief that submission was worse than death. They were fighters in the most literal sense, and when challenged, they made it clear that no force, no matter how powerful, would be met without blood and resistance, survival without surrender. Yet today, that image appears to be fading. Modern Montenegro seems increasingly distant from the spirit that once defined it. The heirs of a tradition that resisted empires now align themselves with transatlantic power blocks that demand ideological conformity and a new Montenegrin identity. Symbols, language, old friendships, as well as historical memory itself appear to be undergoing revision, raising an uncomfortable question. Has Montenegro abandoned the very foundations of its identity in pursuit of Western acceptance? In today's video, this is exactly what we'll discuss. Welcome to The Sovereign Thinker. Like, share, and subscribe so you too can be a sovereign thinker. Thank you all who have donated, and with that said, let's dive in. In 2020, Montenegro became the front-runner in Southeastern Europe to join the EU, ahead of Serbia, North Macedonia, and Albania. Serbia, who was actually the front-runner until then, hit what appears to be an insurmountable barrier over the Kosovo issue. In the meantime, Montenegro slowly but surely caught up, and now in 2026 has opened all 33 chapters for EU succession, permanently closed 12, and the remaining 21 appear to be making good progress. On the surface, this seems like a good thing, right? Discipline, hard and steady work has brought this small mountainous country closer to the promised land of the EU. But scratch a little bit deeper and something darker and more sinister is going on here. Crna Gora, which is the country's actual name, roughly translates to the Black Highlands or the Black Mountains, ergo, Montenegro, is a land that is defined by three major characteristics: its mountains, its beautiful coastlines, and the lowlands of the Zeta Basin. From the 10th century onwards, Montenegro was actually known as Zeta since the majority of its people lived in the Zeta Basin. After the collapse of the Serbian Empire, Zeta emerged as one of the many Serbian states in the aftermath. The ruler of Zeta was the powerful Serbian house Balšić, who quickly became a beacon of resistance in the face of Ottoman advance. Alongside Tsar Lazar of Moravia, the Zetans marched with their compatriots and fought at the Battle of Kosovo in 1389, which was one of the most defining acts of the Serbian people. Though the Serbian coalition lost the battle, it still took another 7 decades for the Ottomans to conquer the remaining Serbian lands. Within those 7 decades, Balša III gave Zeta to his uncle Stefan Lazarević, the son of Tsar Lazar, which reunited Zeta back with the Serbian state. But this only delayed the inevitable. The Ottoman advance was relentless, and the Serbian despotate was eventually wiped off the map in 1459. What emerged was House Crnojević, who abandoned the Zeta Basin and moved up into the mountains to escape the Ottomans. It was from here that House Crnojević ruled and where the name Crna Gora emerged as the primary political designation of the land. Retreating into the unconquerable mountains, the Crnojević managed to preserve Serbian culture, the church, language, customs, and identity. This cultural continuity reached its most remarkable expression with the establishment of the Crnojević printing press in the 1490s. Operating from Cetinje, it produced Cyrillic Orthodox liturgical books, making it the first state-sponsored printing press in Southeastern Europe. It's important to provide additional context here. The Ottoman conquest of Southeastern Europe was transformative and often brutal. Populations were displaced, traditional social structures were disrupted or destroyed, and religious and cultural landscapes were reshaped as Islam spread. Similar pressures were exerted elsewhere as well, along the Adriatic coast under Venetian rule and from the north by the Hungarian crown and later by the Habsburgs. Serbian lands found themselves compressed by conquering powers advancing from every direction. Within this environment of sustained pressure, survival was uneven. Many Serbian regions were absorbed into various imperial systems and gradually lost political autonomy. Yet, in the isolated mountainous interior of Crna Gora, geography combined with the harsh way of life produced a different outcome. These highland communities proved more capable of sustained resistance than other Serbian regions. In doing so, they preserved religious institutions, cultural memory, and a sense of continuity that became increasingly difficult to maintain elsewhere, allowing the Serbian tradition to endure where others struggled to survive. This system reached its intellectual and cultural apex under Peter II Njegoš, who ruled in the first half of the 19th century. Njegoš was a ruler, a theologian, and a poet, giving voice to centuries of struggles in works that fused political thought, philosophy, and epic tradition. Through his writing, most famously The Mountain Wreath, the experience of Crna Gora was elevated from local resistance to a universal meditation on freedom, sacrifice, and moral choice. In Njegoš, the lived traditions preserved since the Crnojevići found their most enduring articulation under his dynasty, and it was all written in Cyrillic and grounded firmly in the Serbian worldview. Under the Njegoš Dynasty, Crna Gora became more than just a surviving remnant of the medieval Serbian world. It actually became its most defiant heir. The mountains that had once offered refuge were becoming symbols of a political philosophy, that freedom, even in poverty and isolation, was preferable to comfort in submission. This ethos would carry Montenegro well into the 20th century. Twenty-first-century Montenegro, unfortunately, presents a striking contrast to its historical self. As mentioned earlier in the video, the country is now a frontrunner to joining the EU. Some of the economic, political, and social reforms it's made in recent years aren't inherently bad, but what needs to be highlighted is this unspoken or unofficial demand that Montenegro's past must be abandoned and a new Montenegrin identity must be adopted in opposition to the Serbian one. In the span of a few decades, the country has reoriented almost entirely toward Western political and economic structures, adopted its ideological thinking, and in the process diminishing its own collective identity. For example, Montenegro joined NATO in 2017, less than 2 decades after being bombed by this very alliance in 1999, and in 2006, when Montenegro separated from Serbia, the country adopted the euro without trying to create its own currency first. In other words, the country hasn't given itself any other alternatives other than to pursue full transatlantic integration, essentially locking itself to the well-being of the West. It also sanctioned Russia, despite historically close cultural and political ties. And don't be fooled, this has less to do with standing up for Ukraine and more so to do with cozying up with the West. The list goes on, but the point is, each of these steps reflects a conscious decision to align with Western institutions, which is often in conflict with Montenegro's principles. But what we really need to shine a light on is the internal cultural reorientation accompanying this geopolitical turn. The Cyrillic alphabet, once central to Montenegro's literature and religious tradition, has been marginalized in public life. It is no longer the official alphabet of the nation. Latin instead has been adopted to make Montenegro appear more Western. It's as if the Montenegrins adopted the Arabic script while the Ottomans were in charge to cater to the Sultan. But perhaps the most shocking thing the state has done is the recognition of Kosovo and Metohija. If there was ever a move that broke modern Montenegro from its past, is this recognition. Not only is Kosovo the heart of Serbia, but it's also the heart of Montenegro. Kosovo is the main point of reference that defines who they are by the sacrifices they made to defend the sacred land from the advancing Ottomans. This recognition is the ultimate indication that something is seriously wrong here. It's a definitive break with the Serbian historical narrative that Montenegros themselves crucially help preserve. But why is this happening? Why is Montenegro distancing itself from its past? Is it really necessary for Montenegro to abandon their Serbian heritage to be accepted into the West? None of this can be properly understood without situating Montenegro's choices within the broader geopolitical context. Montenegro's accession to NATO was strategically significant as it completed the alliance's consolidation of the Adriatic coast, an objective the West was unable to fully achieve during the Cold War, and something that Belgrade would have blocked otherwise. This shift also had direct consequences for Serbia, effectively reinforcing its landlocked status. When combined with the Western-backed separation of Kosovo and Metohija and the establishment of the long-term NATO military presence there, Serbia's strategic depth was further reduced, transforming it into a rump state that cannot threaten US strategic interests. From this perspective, Montenegro's realignment appears less as an isolated national decision and more as part of a wider geopolitical strategy aimed at reshaping the post-Yugoslav space. Critics often draw parallels to contemporary concerns surrounding Ukraine, arguing that the loss of the Odessa Oblast could similarly deprive Kiev maritime access and permanently weaken the country, turning it into a rump state that cannot threaten Russian strategic interests. In other words, all this highlights how Montenegro's modern trajectory is deeply intertwined with great power politics, that what is happening in Montenegro has happened before and is happening again, and this is all just standard geopolitics on a chessboard. So, from a strategic standpoint, Montenegro's transformation is just another step towards serving wider objectives, that is, NATO expansion eastward and consolidating areas that were long outside US control to ensure this part of the world remains within the Western sphere of influence. And since Serbia was unlikely to join such institutions, the geopolitical logic is undeniable. The further Montenegro is culturally and historically from Serbia, the easier it will be to limit Serbia's influence and by extension, keeping other rivals at bay, ensuring consolidation. What remains open to debate is what Montenegro receives in return. Despite integration into Western political and monetary systems, the country continues to face economic challenges, limited industrial capacity, and demographic decline. Its standard of living has not converged with that of Western Europe, and its long-term economic position remains fragile, especially since the EU's future itself is not certain. For critics, this raises a deeper question: whether Montenegro has exchanged a historically rooted identity for geopolitical alignment that offers empty promises, little genuine prosperity or agency. So we return to the question, what happened to Montenegro? Well, the country has been drawn into the role of yet another geopolitical pawn in Southeastern Europe, shaped to fit the strategic interest of larger powers. To make this realignment durable, Montenegro has undergone a sustained process of social and cultural redefinition, one aimed at softening its historic defiance, pacifying its political instincts, and above all, distancing itself from Serbian identity. But perhaps all this is just adaptation. Perhaps it is survival by different means. And yet, despite all this, history has a way of resisting erasure. In 2019, the Montenegrin government tried to introduce a controversial law regarding church property that would have impacted the Serbian Orthodox Church. In short, a separate Montenegrin Orthodox Church has been promoted in opposition to the Serbian Church, as part of the ongoing nation-building and identity redefinition process. However, this backfired heavily as it resulted in mass protests nationwide that defended the Serbian Church. This ended with the removal of the government at the time. Additionally, the country's latest census from 2024 show the number of people in Montenegro who identify as Serbian and who declare Serbian as their primary language has grown, while those who identify as Montenegrin have declined. Meaning, beneath the surface of policy and geopolitics, the older current of defiance in Montenegro still lives. Montenegro's spirit hasn't yet been extinguished, and despite being caught up in great power politics, the people quietly remain defiant and are still pushing back. If, in Montenegro, identity is preserved from below rather than imposed from above, then the story of this people may not be finished after all. Whether the nation fully forgets itself or quietly remembers who it has always been will remain an open question, one that time will ultimately answer. Thank you all for listening to the very end. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Much love to the people over there, and as always, ciao for now.